U-boat submarine campaign during the Second World War was one of the most effective parts of the German war effort, almost bringing Great Britain to its knees. But what was it like on board a U-boat as they waged total war in the Atlantic? Meet Hans Pfizer. Born just outside of Lübeck in northern Germany, he has always had a fascination with the sea. He was 17 when the war broke out in 1939 and was employed as an apprentice mechanic. In 1941, his education was over and Hans was faced with a choice: wait for a conscription notice from the Wehrmacht, or take matters into his own hands and enlist himself. The thought of freezing to death in Russia is less than appealing to him, so he makes the choice to join the Marine, the German Navy. He was sent to basic training where he volunteered for submarine service. Hans doesn't know what caused him to sign up for this job. He knows the risks, but a combination of patriotism, a desire for status, and more than a little youthful optimism led him on this path. Hans is in good shape, and his experience as a mechanic makes him an ideal candidate for U-boat service. His 3 months of basic training is carried out at the port of Kiel. Discipline was strict, but he soon learned the ins and outs of life aboard a submarine. Learning his skills on a small Type 2 SE, a tiny coastal patrol sub, Hans takes to life in a sub. Well, and he graduates from his training. He is then assigned to his first true boat. This is U-134, a Type 7C U-boat known as the workhorse of the Kriegsmarine. Over their production run, 568 boats were built from 1938 to 1944. The Type 7C was a slightly larger variant of the Type 7B with a length of 220 ft, or about 67 meters, 2212 ft, or 7 meter across, and when surface displaces about 761 tons. It was armed with 5 torpedo tubes, 4 in the bow and 1 in the stern, and also had an 88 mm deck gun and a 20 mm anti-aircraft gun that could be used when they surfaced. The sub had a crew of between 44 and 52. Hans Fischer is one of a crew of 49, and thanks to his mechanical experience, he is assigned to the engine room. The Type 7C has a pair of diesel engines that can generate a combined 3,200 horsepower that Hans is responsible for maintaining. While underwater, the sub is propelled by electric motors. After taking on supplies, they set out from their port in occupied Norway to the North Atlantic to hunt Allied shipping. The Type 7C has a much shorter range than later designs like the 9C, so voyages were much shorter in duration. This may mean less time in the field, limiting their combat effectiveness, but it does come as a relief for the crew. Once underway, Hans comes to a startling realization. Serving aboard a U-boat is possibly the most miserable way to spend the war. He has to share a space with 48 other men in a claustrophobic environment where concepts like personal space and privacy were distant memories. Space was at a premium, and every nook and cranny of the boat was needed for supplies and equipment. Crew comfort is a foreign concept. The men would sleep anywhere there was space, including in the engine room or in the torpedo room. There weren't enough bunks to go around, so the crew would practice hot bunking, where the men would share a bunk and sleep in shifts. Under normal circumstances, the crew would operate in 8-hour shifts. When one sailor was on duty, another would sleep, rotating continually. The only place with even a little bit of privacy is the captain's quarters, a single bunk separated from the rest of the crew by a plywood screen or a fabric curtain. The 2 diesel engines that propelled the sub generated a lot of heat, which was difficult to vent unless the sub was at the surface. Temperatures inside the claustrophobic space would skyrocket, especially in the engine room where poor Hans was stationed, and could be well over 100 degree F or 38 degree C. While he and the rest of the engine crew cook, they're also inhaling diesel fumes that only add to the misery. Now would be a good time to mention the bathing and hygiene on board U-134. There weren't any. Space was at a premium, and a dedicated area for showering was not considered essential. The men would be given a strict ration of half a bucket of water a day, and this was for drinking. Something as frivolous as washing was not possible, so clothes and skin would soon be covered in oil, grease, and sweat. They were given a deodorant to keep the smell at bay, but this did very little. There was also only one toilet that the entire crew had to share. If bathing was impossible, shaving was out of the question, and it wasn't long before the crew sported messy beards. Hans does his duty well, and after several hours, it's time for him to eat. He tucks himself away for his daily ration. Food is stored all around the ship, tucked away in every possible space, and more than once, Hans has had to duck out of the way of smoked sausages hanging from the pipes. No matter what he eats, however, it all tastes the same, like diesel fuel. The fumes are so pervasive that everything has the acrid taste of refined petroleum. There is some respite from the misery. The boat does spend some time at the surface using the raised periscope and a crew of sailors with binoculars to search for enemy ships while keeping an eye out for aircraft. Hans isn't part of these groups that go outside, but for a little while at least, the cramped interior of the sub is a little less crowded. And with an open hatch, there's at least the suggestion of a breeze from the outside. It's probably Hans's imagination, but he revels in the thought of some fresh air. Life aboard U-134 is cramped, hot, and filthy. For Hans, even the simplest daily routines became a struggle, and every moment reminded him of how unforgiving life beneath the waves could be. But if you'd like to experience naval warfare without the misery of diesel fumes and hot bunking, then you're in luck. Today's video is sponsored by World of Warships, celebrating their 10th anniversary with the Grand Voyage event. World of Warships is a free-to-play naval combat game where you can command some of history's most iconic warships in epic 12 versus 12 battles. With over 500 ships across 10 nations, there's always a new way to test your naval strategy. The game has just been updated with some stunning new water effects and more than 40 detailed maps with dynamic weather, making every battle look and feel like the real thing. You can play solo or form a division with your friends. And yeah, it's available on PC and console. And because it's their 10th anniversary, there's huge rewards waiting for you. New players who register with our link below and use the invite code XVOYAGE instantly get the Japanese Tier 3 cruiser Tenru, a port slot, a commander, and 20 days of premium account time. Plus, you can unlock even more rewards like the US Tier 7 cruiser Boise, 7 super containers, 40 million credits, and much more. So, honor the past, command the present, and celebrate 10 incredible years at sea. Check out World of Warships today by using our link at the top of the description. Suddenly the alert goes up. The party outside rushes in and slams the hatch shut. And through the shouting, Hans hears that a destroyer was spotted on the horizon and it was on an intercept course.
The order goes out. Crash dive. This means U-134 will attempt to sink as quickly as possible.
The ballast tanks are flooded and the boat drops rapidly. The engines are then cut off to prevent their detection by sonar. Hans sweats more than normal, knowing that above him an enemy warship is actively hunting him down, ready to send him to the bottom. A Type 7 CU boat has a crush depth of 220 meters or around 720 ft. Hans has no idea how deep they are cruising, but it was unlikely that they were at that depth. When underwater, the time seems to tick on endlessly. And there's another problem that's creeping through the ship. When the boat is submerged, the air in the sub is trapped. Carbon dioxide will build up rapidly from the exhalation of the sailors, and after about 5 hours, the buildup of the poisonous gas reaches 1 and 12% of the atmosphere. At 212% concentration, it can affect cognitive function. To prevent this, the sub does have alkaline cartridges and oxygen tanks, but the absolute maximum the sub can stay underwater is about 72 hours. Time passes with Hans and the rest of the crew standing by, waiting to follow the captain's orders or bracing for depth charges. The men, not actively needed, were encouraged to go to sleep since they would use up less oxygen that way, but few do. Neither happened. After an intolerable amount of waiting, the captain slowly and cautiously raises the boat. He checks the periscope and scans all around. Nothing. The U-134 goes off in another direction, hopefully away from the hunting destroyer and to more vulnerable prey. During the rest of the tour, Hans follows the same routine of work, eating, sleeping, no sunlight or fresh air, and constant misery. Their time was unsuccessful, and no other Allied ships were spotted. They pull into port, and Hans leaves the boat covered in sweat and grease, smelling like body odor and diesel fumes and a scraggly beard. He finally gets to shower, shave, and eat something that doesn't contain petrochemicals. After time on shore, he then goes back onto the U-boat for another patrol. Hans Fischer was lucky. He goes on 3 more patrols, and though there were close calls, he survives. Most of the others were not so lucky. As the war continued, the Allies became more and more adept at combating the U-boat and took a terrible toll. About 3/4 of the German submarine fleet and their crews were sent to the bottom of the ocean, and Hans is one of less than 10,000 to make it to the end. He considers writing a book about his experiences, but decides against it, not wanting to relive one of the most miserable experiences of the Second World War. If you want to experience commanding warships without the misery Hans endured, don't forget to check out World of Warships and join their 10th anniversary Grand Voyage. The link is right at the top of the description. Use the code XVOYAGE to claim your exclusive rewards today.